We're up to Buffalo, so we're going to talk about the all-time best of Buffalo. It's what Sabres fans need right now, right? Now, I'm wearing a Jack Eichel jersey for two reasons. One, it is a Buffalo Adidas. I'm trying to wear Adidas for this series. And two, um, honestly, Eichel's probably going to end up being the best player that they've had if he plays his entire career in Buffalo. Now, that's a tough call because Gilbert Perreault right now is the greatest. I'll use him for the thumbnail. Gilbert Perreault is the greatest Buffalo Sabre of all time, and you can't argue anybody else. You can try to argue somebody may have been a little more talented, but in terms of greatest all-time Sabre, he was there forever. Had 1,326 points. Not bad. 512 goals, 814 assists. Yeah, he's the number one in all three categories. So I can't make an argument for anybody else. Rob Ray, toughest Sabre ever. 3,189 penalty minutes. Say, yeah, probably. Rob Ray, of course, now the color commentator for Buffalo games. Very entertaining. He reminds me of Bobby Heenan. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Reminds me of Bobby Heenan, the way he talks and everything. So Rob Ray, I really appreciate what he does now, and his teammates appreciated him a lot back when he played as well. When you had him and Brad May together, boy, I tell you, there was definitely some fear if you were playing against the Buffalo Sabres. Power play goals, Andreychuk leads on the all-time list with 161. Dave Andreychuk, one of the really good young Buffalo Sabres in the 80s. Now, if we're talking about their greatest, Rick Martin has to be mentioned. René Robert has to be mentioned as two parts of that French connection along with Perreault. The best line the team ever had. And I don't know that you have much debate when it comes to that either, when it comes to the best lines the Buffalo Sabres ever had. Mike Foligno played there for a long time. Better offensively than I think he's remembered. He's remembered for doing the jump off the ice when he'd score a goal, but that's about what he's remembered for. Phil Housley, who played defense and forward as well. Housley is one of the earlier mentions I can do in terms of my watching hockey, where a defenseman I think was helped by being a forward for a little while, and it made him a better defenseman when he was thrown back on the blue line. Although with Housley, I think that happened more with Winnipeg than it happened with Buffalo. But still, really, really good career for him. Craig Ramsey, Mike Ramsey. Yeah. So one's AY, one's EY. And yeah, Craig Ramsey was one of my favorites. Good defensive forward. And I've always liked the defensive forwards, the guys who play about 1,000 games, don't get a ton of points, don't get a ton of goals, and they're capable of that leadership at both ends of the ice. And I liked him a lot. Mike Ramsey, good defensive defenseman for the most part. He could put up some points here and there because it was the 80s, because most players did. But both of them solid players. Thomas Vanek, got to throw him on there. Pat LaFontaine. If not for injury, Pat LaFontaine would be likely much higher on all of their lists, whether it's goals, points, assists. He had that 148-point season. Best season any Buffalo Sabre ever had. Danny Gare and Alex McGillney I wanted to have on there as well, because McGillney with 76 goals. Really excellent career he had in Buffalo. And of course, he was the first young Russian player to come over. They let all the veterans come over when they were kind of past their prime, or at least perceived to be. McGillney kind of snuck out. So, McGillney's an interesting story, and if you haven't heard the story about how he defected, it's a very interesting one. And the Buffalo Sabres, one of those teams that have had great moments. They've had really good teams, just haven't quite been able to win the Stanley Cup. Now, goaltending, Ryan Miller leads them in all-time wins with 284. Save percentage, it's not going to be anybody but the Dominator, 926. So I talk about Perreault being the all-time greatest player. You can make the argument that Dominik Hasek, all-time greatest player for Buffalo. I would probably still go with Perreault, but for me, it's a matter of that longevity as a member of the Sabres. Those Hart trophies definitely help Hasek's argument. Shots against, Ryan Miller, 16,217. Shutouts, Hasek with 55. Hasek dragged Buffalo to a lot of wins, dragged them to playoff wins as well, and Stanley Cup finalists, of course, in 99. So both Hasek and Perreault led the Buffalo Sabres to the Stanley Cup finals. Again, for Eichel to get into that conversation, Buffalo needs to A, make the playoffs, and B, they kind of need to make a run. Now, in terms of their goaltenders, you've got Hasek, you've got Miller, who are their two best. Obviously, Hasek a little bit higher up than Miller. Tom Barrasso, be easy to forget about the fact that Barrasso was a high school kid, comes in and was pretty darn good right out of the gate. Don Edwards, also an excellent goaltender in his time in Buffalo. Marty Biron had a nice career with the Sabres. Bob Sauvé, Darren Pupa, who had that one excellent year. And I'm trying to remember which one it was with Buffalo where, I want to say 88, 89, but it may have been 89, 90, where he had this one just really amazing season. And Roger Crozier during the 70s. When you have an expansion team and you need somebody who can come in and provide that stability and an experienced hand, Roger Crozier was the guy. Again, Hasek versus Perreault. Now I'm leaning towards Hasek for the thumbnail, but probably still beat Perreault because he's kind of Mr. Sabre. He's just, that's him all over. Never played for another team, whereas Hasek did. He played in Chicago before he went to Buffalo, and then he played in Detroit, played in Ottawa. So their overall best team, I went with 74-75. They had 113 points. They were Stanley Cup finalists, and of course, that was Perreault and the French connection that got them there. Now, in 99, they got back to the Stanley Cup finals. That was really Hasek being Hasek and getting them there. In terms of the overall team, I would give the edge to the 74-75 Buffalo Sabres. If you want to make the statement for 06-07, they didn't make that Stanley Cup Finals push. If you want to make the argument for 99, I would understand that. So that's fine. But I would go with 74-75. Now, most wins versus any team in their history, Montreal. Not a surprise there. They've been in the same division with Montreal for a long time. 130 wins versus the Montreal Canadiens. Points percentage, they actually have the best points percentage versus San Jose at a 698 points percentage. Goals for, they've scored the most goals in their existence against Boston, 926. Goals for per game, that's against the LA Kings. They've scored 3.65 goals per game. Be interested to see how many teams have their best goals per game against the Kings. Kings were really bad in the 80s. So that could very well be where a lot of these stats come from. Best goals against per game is against Anaheim at 2.58. So the overall numbers for Buffalo in their existence have been very good. And you look at the expansion cousins they have in the Vancouver Canucks, and of the two, I think they've had the better history. You can make that argument now after the last decade has kind of dragged Buffalo down a bit. But I would say over the 50 years, I still think Buffalo's kind of had a better history. Although there's been 3 Stanley Cup finals for Vancouver to 2 for Buffalo. That's a whole video for another time. Notable captains right now, Jack Eichel. And again, Eichel will be trying to catch some of these records of Perreault's before his career's out. Pat LaFontaine, who again, his time with Buffalo was shortened, or else he would be more in this conversation. Lindy Ruff, who would go on to be a very, very, very long-term coach for the Buffalo Sabres. This is why when I see Ruff behind the bench of another team, it looks weird to me. It just doesn't look right. So Ruff to me is just, he's a Sabre. That's how that's supposed to be. And of course, Perreault. Perreault is captain. If a goaltender can be captain, Hasek would have had his run as captain as well. There are times where the goaltender's the unofficial captain. Official captain doesn't work, ask Vancouver. Now, most points that this team's had in any given season, 74-75 and 2006-2007, both seasons they had 113. Worthy of note, 74-75, that wouldn't have included any overtime points. That's straight points during regulation, 113. So that total to me is more impressive, and thus I think that's their best team. Longest playoff streak was from 1975 to 1985. That's 11 straight seasons in the playoffs. And the Adams got kind of tough during certain parts of the 80s to make the playoffs in comparison with, say, the Smythe Division or the Norris Division out west. Best coach, I went with Floyd Smith. Floyd Smith was their coach when they went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 74-75. Now, Lindy Ruff gets honorable mention, but again, Lindy Ruff, he was there for a really long time. But there was a lot of complaints during certain parts of his time as a coach. So I went with Floyd Smith. And best GM, I went with Punch Imlach. You get a team that straight out of their expansion season in 1970 manages to go to a Stanley Cup final in 75. The GM did something right there. So I'm going to go with Punch Imlach as best GM. And there are other notables, but to me, Imlach is their best general manager that they've had. He was a Sabre category. Shorter than other teams. Really is shorter than other teams. Slava Kozlov spent a partial season there. Craig Simpson also spent about 40 games there. And Doug Gilmour was a Buffalo Sabre towards the end of his career. And of course, he's remembered for being St. Louis, Calgary, and Toronto mostly. So I threw Doug Gilmour up there. It just tells you that Buffalo hasn't had a lot of big star players that have come through and played only a few games and retired, or only, so there's something to be said for stability. And I remember in the 80s, Buffalo and Montreal stood out to me as teams that were very stable when it came to their rosters, that there was no major upheaval going on. And comparing the Sabres of the 80s to the Sabres of now, it's night and day. So we'll see how long it takes for them to get back to that standard. And you get the feeling like it's this elusive. Having that success, it can be really elusive to find the exact formula, and they're still trying to track it currently as I speak, as we're in the suspension of the 2019-2020 season. We'll find out. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I guess that's a question that we have as well. When can we start looking forward to seeing the Buffalo Sabres threatening the 100-point mark again? When can we start talking about taking that past of Perreault and Hasek and having Eichel on that same level? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.